Hello, thank you for joining us. This is our video series on peer support, how to eliminate stigma, and everything mental illness. My name is Chrissy.
And I'm Jody.
And today we're going to tackle the topic of how to tell your story. On our last video, we talked a little bit about it, but we put a lot of information and a lot of time. So we're just going to quickly go over 4 separate points of how to tell your recovery story and why it's important. Why don't you tell us why you think it's important first?
I think the single biggest important point to make when you tell your recovery story is it can stamp out stigma, and you can reach large audiences, and a lot of times if you're telling it to the right audiences, you're going to get some people that have an instant connection with what you're saying, and that's pretty cool.
And mine is a little more forceful. I feel like it's our duty to give back. Mental illness is such a stigmatized and such a silent pandemic that is something that keeps people alone and keeps them isolated. And it is our duty when we get into recovery to start telling our story and to start connecting with people so we can get rid of the stigma attached to it. So that's why I think it's important. So we're going to talk about 4 different tips on how to get your recovery story together, kind of some do's and some don'ts. And we're going to have Jody go first.
Okay, thanks, Chrissy. What I'll say about the focus of telling your recovery story is you want to achieve a balance. There's always extremes to every situation. The one extreme is you'll use a lot of psychology jargon, and you'll talk in a very clinical way. And I think you'll find is that your audience will disconnect. You can be a great presenter, but if you're not connecting emotionally with your audience, it won't be as well received as it could be. The other extreme is that you may stumble into the area where you're oversharing or being graphic. And, you want to be careful because, there are certain audiences that you could be speaking to that they could actually get triggered or traumatized by what you're saying. So, you want to shoot for the middle. You want to make an emotional connection with your audience, and you want to tell it like a story. That's really where you're going to get a lot of connection with people. People love a good story.
So the second point, and just to kind of emphasize what Jody is saying, is you need to gauge the person that you're telling the story to, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's an entire audience. People are going to mirror you and your confidence in telling that story piece. For instance, when I talk to the Denver Police Department at their CIT training, I can share all the gory details about anything that's happened because they're used to seeing that stuff. They're used to hearing it, so it's not going to be a shock factor, and I'm not going to offend them in any way to where they don't want to hear anymore. But then again, if it's a fundraiser and it's a keynote, I certainly don't want to be sharing any gory details while people are eating, and it may turn people off to mental health and mental illness, and it may push us further into the stigma. So just kind of to piggyback on what he's saying, that comes down to you as well, and that's being comfortable in your own story. Be careful not to share too much too soon until you're ready. That could re-traumatize you as well as send you in an episode. And just kind of as an example, I've been speaking for about 3 or 4 years on my story, but when I first started speaking, I could barely tell anything about the kind of the details of my suicide attempt and my actual diagnosis and just the in-depth look at it because I was ashamed and I was still feeling guilty, and I wasn't at the phase of recovery that I am now. And I've been diagnosed for 18 years now, and in recovery in full recovery probably for 5 years. It's just been recently that I'm just kind of an open book about everything, and that's because I got comfortable in the story and I was ready to tell it. So be really careful. If you're not ready to share details, then don't. Chances are, the deeper you get into your recovery, you'll become more comfortable, and then you'll make people around you more comfortable and able to hear it.
Yeah. So, the third point that I'll make is I want to talk a little bit about the way I structure my story. What I do is I start off pre-diagnosis, what my life was like before I received my diagnosis. And then I get into the during phase of my story. So when I received my diagnosis, I didn't think of it at the time as trauma, but it was trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's where I really got to be careful with how I structure the story during that phase, because it can be very triggering. And then I talk about my recovery and post-diagnosis and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
So, make sure your story is a wellness story.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not a wellness story, I would question whether or not it's a recovery story.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what people need to know. Like, I think you want to ask yourself at the end of your story, if I was the one listening to this, would I have hope?
Right.
Would I see would I see that it's possible for me to do it as well? Like, that's really what people need to know, is like, I can recover too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. A little bit about the mechanics of how I wrote my story. I basically sat down at the dining room table and I placed pieces of paper all over the table, and I started writing, and my mind jumps a good bit. I have a very short attention span. So, in my thought process, I would be pre-diagnosis 1 second, and then the next second I was post-diagnosis. So I started just writing the sentences down that pertain to that phase of my recovery, and it came together like a puzzle. Like, I started making connections from one page to the other page, and before you know it, I had one cohesive story.
And so that's what it is like telling your recovery story. Just like Jody said, it's your own story, and it's a progression, and you want to end with, this is where I'm at now. Now, we all know in recovery that you can fluctuate and you can relapse and you can have episodes. However, once you've made it to a certain level of recovery, you can get back there, and then you can progress even further. And so that brings it to the fourth point, which is, once you've got, kind of like Jody said, the mechanics down, okay, here's here's the diagnosis, here's the post. What do I do now? Practice, practice, practice. That's point number 4. Practicing doesn't mean you have to get up and, in front of any microphone ever and talk in front of a million people. You can join Toastmasters, like I said before on our other video, or there's other speaker associations, or you can just practice in front of your friends or your family and just have them give constructive feedback. And if they don't give constructive feedback, then you need to think about whether or not they need to be your friends.
And we're going to talk about that in the next episode, is like who you don't want to be your friends.
I would maybe preface it with, can you please give me really nice constructive feedback?
Toxic peeps. So basically what I wanted to add to it is, I'm sitting beside a natural presenter. She, but she still practices. On the one hand, you can give her a topic and she can present on it at a moment's notice, but she's always presenting. Even if she's one-on-one, it's like she's presenting. She's high energy, and she's spirited about what she talks about. And it makes her a great presenter. On the other hand, it takes me a lot of practice. We're doing this YouTube videos really got me out of my comfort zone, but I love it because, every episode I do makes me more and more comfortable. And it's a goal of mine to be a presenter one day, in large functions.
And that's a testament to what we're saying. The more you present, the more comfortable you're going to get. I mean, just turn a video on yourself, turn a recorder on yourself, tell your story, listen to it over and over. And I know we don't like to hear our own voice, but still, that's a great way to just practice and keep practicing. So let's go over the 4 points again. Number 1.
Emotional connection. Don't overshare, but also don't get clinical.
Number 2, be comfortable in whatever phase you are in your story as you're presenting or telling it. Don't tell details you're not ready to tell. It could traumatize your own, you could be re-traumatized, and you could be kicked back into an episode. So be comfortable where you are in your recovery, kind of in congruence to what you're telling your story.
And make your story a 3-part story. Pre-diagnosis, during the diagnosis phase, and then your recovery phase.
And number 4, practice, practice, practice. You don't need people to practice. Do it in the mirror. Do it on a recorder. Do it in front of a video. Tell your friends. Tell your animals. Tell your family. Until you're ready to get up and speak in front of other people or start mentoring other people and other peers. That's it for today. But this is our last episode, not forever, but this is our last episode when we're on the same team for work. So this is kind of a bittersweet moment. I don't know if we'll be presenting from our prison library.
Live from the prison library.
We're not in a prison.
We're getting out. We're still going to be on probation, and we're going to get together when we see our POs. So
I think they're coming in here with high uniform.
Here they come. Okay, it's been great.
We will see you next week for the Jody and Chrissy video series on peer support specialists. Bye!
Bye.